I'm Julian Bradley and welcome to this Jazz Hero Masterclass, where I'll show you a range of approaches to improvisation. In this video, I explain the appoggiatura, the double appoggiatura, and the turn, which are three types of ornament which you can use to embellish any melody. I also explain what a musical quote is and show you how you can use them in your solo. And finally, I break down one of my own improvisations and explain the theory behind each phrase. So enjoy the video and I'll talk to you again on the other side. Now there is one word which comes to mind when we're talking about improvisation. And this one word is the same word which I would say applies to composition in general of music, but it also applies to just every creative activity that you could be involved in, whether it's painting, whether it's composing music, whether it's cooking, whatever it is. I would say that the key word is variety. Now, every aspect which you can vary, I think you should try to vary. So when it comes to music, what are some of the things we can vary? Well, we can vary the loudness, the dynamics. We can play things loudly. We can play things quietly. We can play things which get louder. We can play things which get quieter. What are some other things that we can vary? Well, we can vary the range that we play in. We can play in the bass range. You can always play a bass solo, for example. You can play in the mid-range. Or you can play in the high range. So what are some other ways that we could vary our improvisation? Well, there are two basic ways that any melody can move. You can either move by arpeggio, which basically means any type of leap, whether it's thirds, whether it's fourths, or anything bigger. All of these intervals are moving by leap. And often what you'll do is you'll arpeggiate the chord symbol. So if you have an A-7 in the left hand, all of those four chordal tones, A, C, E and G, would make good notes to use in your improvisation. And then when the chords change, you can just keep arpeggiating that chord symbol. The other way that you can move is by step. Basically running up the scale in step. So that's another thing that we can vary. The key word, remember, is variety. So we can vary moving by arpeggio, by leap, with moving by step. Generally, moving by leap sounds more confident. It's the equivalent of running, I would say. You're taking big leaps like you really know where you're going, you're confident in yourself, whereas moving by step sounds slightly timid, but these are both contrasting moods which you can use in your solo. So moving by leap sounds more confident, more bold, whereas moving by step sounds more timid. And to make an interesting, engaging musical story in your solo, you want to have contrasting elements. You want to have variation in as many different things as you can think of. Now, what other things could we vary? Well, we could vary rhythms. We could have sections which move very slowly. And then we could have other sections which move much more quickly. So the key word is variety. If you can think of anything that you can vary, then you should vary it in your solo. Have some sections where you're playing in the low range, some sections where you're in the high range, some sections in the mid range. Have some sections where you're playing loudly, some sections when you're playing quietly. And you can have some sections where you're playing very few notes, playing just a simple idea, and then you can have other sections where you're playing much more complicated things. Now, one technique which I use a lot in my solos and in just generally writing melodies is what I would call embellishment. Now, embellishment is kind of the classical term for what this is. It's basically a way to take a fairly basic melody and to decorate it and to dress it up with some nice ornaments. So, for example, when you hear me play things like this, this is just a load of ornaments, a load of types of decoration around a fairly basic melody. For example, the underlying melody is probably something like this. Just going down an A minor chord. But I've decorated it by using what are called appoggiaturas, and I'll explain what those are in a second. Now, first of all, there are two types of notes: resolution notes and tension notes. Now, this is something that I'm really going to be getting into in the new year when we launch all this ear training stuff, because a key way to transcribe a melody by ear is to be able to recognize the difference between notes which sound resolved and notes which sound unresolved. Now, very briefly, the resolution notes of any scale are the root, the third, and the fifth. So if we're in A minor, which the current example is in, only A, C, and E will sound resolved. These notes don't feel like they need to move anywhere. Now all the other notes sound unresolved. These are tension notes. And all of these tension notes want to resolve by moving to the closest resolution note. So F, for example, is a tension note when heard over an A minor chord. And F wants to move to the closest resolution note, which happens to be an E natural. And this isn't just some abstract concept. You can really hear these attractions, these resolutions in action. So when I play this note, you can probably sing how it wants to resolve. So when I'm doing these embellishments, really I'm just teasing the listener by playing with these tension notes which resolve. Now, in particular, I'm using one technique which is called an appoggiatura. Now, an appoggiatura means to play a dissonant tension note on the downbeat, the strong beat, which then immediately resolves. So when you hear me play notes like this, that is an appoggiatura. I'm landing on the downbeat, the strong beat, on a dissonant tension note, which then resolves. Now, a good example of an appoggiatura would be the song Maria in West Side Story. Because that F sharp is a tension note which wants to resolve up to G. So this is what an appoggiatura is. So over an A minor chord, for example, we have these three resolution notes, A, C, E, and each of these resolution notes can be decorated by playing any note sort of surrounding them. It works just as well whether you have the preceding tension note approach from below or above. Now there's another type of embellishment, also borrowed from classical music, and this is called a turn. It's a very similar concept to the appoggiatura, except you start on the resolution note, but then you move away to a tension note, come back, go to the tension note the other side, then come back. Now these tension notes, you could stick within the scale that you're in. If you're in A minor, for example, you could just use the notes from the scale. But also with these ornaments, these appoggiaturas and turns, you can just come out of scale and use the same concept. So with that said, let's take a look at the notes which I'm playing. So I have an A minor chord, sustained, and I'm playing let's break this down. I play an appoggiatura, I precede the E with a dissonant tension note, which resolves immediately. Then I use this sort of decoration. It's not quite a turn, because a turn starts on the resolution note itself, but I've used another type of ornament which has a name, and the name slips me right now. But I guess it's some type of appoggiatura. Maybe it's a double appoggiatura or something. The name's not too important, it's the concept. So I'm aiming for C, but I precede it with a note below and a note above. And then I repeat that pattern for the next note, which is an A. And this type of embellishment can work over any type of chord. So it works well over a minor 7 chord. Could also work over a major 7 chord, would work over a dominant 7 chord. However, I personally think it is most effective over a minor chord. So continuing with this pattern, appoggiatura, then these double appoggiaturas, another tension note is D, I move up to E through a chromatic passing note. So this is a technique which you can always use. As I say, it works best, I think, over minor chords. So say for example you had a C minor chord in the chord sheet. The resolution notes are going to be 1, 3 and 5. Now any of these 3 notes are going to sound good if you embellish them by using either a turn or an appoggiatura, or if you use the other effect, which I think is called a double appoggiatura, where you precede it by the tension note below, the tension note above, followed by the resolution note. This is for example, this is a common type of melodic phrase which you'll hear in jazz. So I use this technique a lot in my solos, and it's certainly something which you could practice. A good practice would just be to choose a minor chord, C minor for example. Just focus on these 3 resolution notes, and practice preceding each one with some type of ornament. So let's take a look at the solo which I play over Blue Lotus. Now I start my solo with a musical quote. What is a musical quote? A musical quote is when you quote someone else's music, usually the melody, because chords aren't as memorable. But you take a melody from somewhere else, and I've chosen A Christmas Carol because it is coming up for Christmas right now, and you use it in your melody, and this is used often in jazz, and I think it's a really nice thing to do. And actually in the past, this was done a lot more than it is done today, probably because of copyright issues that are now, the way things are. But back in the day, composers like Shostakovich would use other people's melodies as musical quotes throughout their, symphonies and everything. But, they'd always use the melodies in a new context over a different key, for example. And I think it's a really interesting thing to do. So when you use someone else's melody in your solo, this is called a musical quote. Now, when you use a musical quote, really you just want to play a small excerpt of that quote. You don't want to play it for too long. Often 2 measures is enough to create the effect. And a key bit of advice is you want to know where you're going to go to next. Because I have a memory of when I was in sort of end of high school, and I used a musical quote in a solo. But I didn't have anywhere, I wasn't prepared, I didn't know where I was going to go to next, and I kind of stuttered and sort of stalled my solo, and the effect is lost unless you go straight into something else. You don't want to just play the quote on its own because it sounds like you're just joking around. So here I've used the Christmas Carol, God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. But then straight away, as soon as people have recognized the melody, I go into something else. But then I actually carry on that melody when the chord changes to D minor. Before going into something else. Now this is interesting. So after the D minor chord, we have a B flat dominant 7, and in my solo, I've decided to play B flat whole tone scale over the B flat dominant 7. The whole tone scale is just a series of whole tones. Sounds very dreamy. It's used a lot in Impressionist music, people like Chopin and Debussy, for example, but it's also used in jazz. I use it in this part of the solo. And then when we return to the A minor chord, I go back into that embellishment which I showed you before. And that's just a load of these techniques surrounding these resolution notes. You might be able to hear that I'm actually holding the sustain pedal, which is again to do with varying my solo. So I've held down the pedal, and again it's just to create variation in my solo, because up until now I haven't really been using the pedal at all. And then to end with, you have an E minor chord, going to D minor 7, going to A minor. Now, Again, I just go back to my musical quote. Which is the ending of God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. Now, to make things sound a bit more interesting, I play it in sixths. Now, sixths are basically the same as thirds, it's just you're putting the third below. So a sixth below is the same as a third above. I could have played it like this, but I'm playing it in sixths. I could also play it in fourths, but I'm playing it in sixths. And again, it's more embellishment. So we have the same A minor chord in the chord sheet. And I've just ended with, starting with the ending for God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. But when I get to about here, I go back into this embellishment. Double appoggiatura. So here is the complete solo with the backing track. So thank you very much for watching. If you found this video useful, please click the thumbs up button in the bottom left hand corner. I'd really appreciate that. And if this is the first video of mine you've seen, make sure you don't miss out on future videos by subscribing to my channel. And you can download the sheet music for Blue Lotus and the solo which I've been discussing at jazzherobooks.com. Also included with the download is the MP3 backing track, so that you can bring your playing to life and master improvisation the smart way. The Blue Lotus ebook is available as an individual download or as a free bonus when you buy the collector's edition ebook. All of my books are ideal for the intermediate piano player who reads music and has at least 5 years playing experience. And I also give you a 90-day money-back guarantee, which allows you to fully explore the material risk-free. So click on the link in the description box and take your jazz piano playing to a whole new level today.